Our tradition has a lot to try to take hold of as I try to arrange all of it in some kind of order on this lectern up here. Our prayer books are rather thick. And by the way, this is the shortened version of the prayer book. You can get a much thicker version if you would like. We have a lot of prayers. In these books, in our tradition, we have separate prayer books for separate holidays. You'll see when you come for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, an entire different set of liturgy. We have prayers that have gone back for centuries, millennia even. Some of the greatest prayers that we have, the priestly benediction that we just said, we can date back thousands of years. But not all of our prayers have exactly withstood the test of time. Some, as you would expect with any tradition, we might find a little problematic, some of their wordings, some of their ideas to our modern sensibilities. And there is a tried and true method to what you should do if you're a rabbi or a prayer leader and you come across one of these prayers. You don't translate it. You just say it in Hebrew and you hope no one notices. We did that earlier today, by the way. But I want to point out one example. Earlier, we said in the Avot ve'imahot, the prayer for our mothers and fathers, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, God of our mothers and our fathers. On the surface, you may be asking, well, what's problematic about that? That seems pretty innocuous. But I am guessing there are people in this room who know exactly what is problematic about that. There are people in this room whose ancestors never said this prayer. These are the Jews who are here that are Jews by choice rather than those who are Jews by chance. Earlier in the service, in the Ve'ahavta, we said, Ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeti me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am Adonai your God who brought you out of Egypt. And these are but two examples in our liturgy that seem to take for granted the generational and historical connection between all of us and the ancestors that worshipped the God of Abraham. We might say, and we do say often, that the Jew by choice is equal in every way to the Jew by chance. But yet, in our prayers, we pray about the covenant of our ancestors. How is the Jew by choice supposed to feel when saying these words? Can she even say them at all? In this week's Torah portion, Moses describes God's expectations for the Israelites once they enter the Holy Land. One of these expectations is that each year, the Israelites will take their bikurim, their first fruits of their harvest, and they will bring them to the temple in Jerusalem, and they will say, I acknowledge this day before the Eternal your God that I have entered the land that the Eternal swore to our fathers to assign us. The Mishnah, which was redacted some 1,800 years ago, asks the question, who does and who does not say these words when they present their offering at the temple? They give some interesting answers. They say, since it applies to your harvest, that if you're farming land that isn't yours, if you're some sort of sharecropper, then, well, it's not really your harvest then, so you're exempt. You don't have to say it. They also say that thieves, people who steal the produce from the land, they are exempt too. I love this idea that they're worried about the people who are stealing in order to make donations. It's a nice world to imagine. But then we get to the convert. The Mishnah says that such a person brings the offering, like everyone else, but they do so in silence. Why? Because, as the Mishnah explains, the convert cannot honestly say, I have entered the land that the Eternal swore to our fathers. Now, it's fair to ask why this matters. None of us are bringing first fruits to anyone. Please don't show up here with fruit. Maybe a little, it's okay, but the ceremony stopped with the destruction of the temple some 2,000 years ago. But the Mishnah, which was redacted after the temple was destroyed, so they're asking a question that had no practical implications either, but they don't stop just with this one ceremony. They go on. The question seems to have inspired the rabbis. They explain, when the convert prays in private, any prayer, she must say not God of my fathers and mothers, like a Jew by chance would say, but instead should change the prayer to say God of the fathers and mothers of Israel. And when that same convert is in public, While everyone else says, God of my ancestors, the convert says, God of your ancestors. This ruling from the Mishnah set a framework that led to additional restrictions on converts. More prayers that had to be altered or omitted. Some authorities ruled the changes were so substantial that converts could not serve as prayer leaders. The prayers, they said, were so different from the community that it just became impossible in their eyes for a Jew by choice to ever lead a congregation. And yet we say that these Jews by choice, are no different than Jews by chance. How is it that both could be true? Despite its stature as the groundwork for rabbinic Judaism, the Mishnah is not the last word. In our tradition, there is never a last word. The Jerusalem Talmud, essentially a commentary on the Mishnah, rejects the established precedent of the Mishnah and argues for equal treatment and status among Jews. But it takes until the 12th century with Maimonides to turn the tide. He received a letter from Obadiah the convert, which will give you a hint of who this man was. And Obadiah asked about the recitation in this week's Torah portion, about bringing those first fruits and the many instances in the prayer service and what he is supposed to say. Before we get to the answer that Maimonides gives him, let's consider how Maimonides addresses Obadiah in the response. He begins by calling him a teacher and a master, a scholar, full of understanding. And Maimonides continues, in answer to the question of how to say these passages, you should recite them all, Obadiah, just as they are formulated in the liturgy. Change nothing. Just as every native-born Israelite prays, so should you, whether in private or in public, as leader of the congregation. Maimonides goes on to explain his reasoning. The first Israelite was Abraham, followed by Sarah. First Hebrew, I should say, was Abraham, followed by Sarah. And the Torah teaches they drew followers whose descendants would ultimately be called Jews. These followers were disciples of Abraham. He was their spiritual father. And therefore, anyone who follows his teachings has that identical claim. But Maimonides adds an interesting caveat. Some words can be changed. The convert might accept Abraham and Sarah as spiritual ancestors, but he might still feel conflicted about praising God for bringing him out of Egypt. Knowing your ancestors were never there can make saying such words a bit difficult. So in such a case, Maimonides advises the convert can choose what to say, while emphasizing it is permissible to say the same words as everyone else. The above approach demonstrates a model for understanding our differences. The first level is that knee-jerk reaction. An individual just doesn't seem to fit. Our system doesn't know what to do with her, and rather than rethink the system, the burden is on the individual to change, regardless of any embarrassment it might cause. The second level recognizes the injustice of the first approach. We erred in keeping you out, and so now we are inviting you in. You are equal to us in every way. That sounds good, but that approach too is flawed. That approach is an overcorrection. It says something that is also unjust. It says, essentially, we will both agree, you and I, to pretend that you and I are the same. To understand the final level of understanding differences, we have to consider Maimonides' instruction that the Jew by choice be allowed to choose the language of the prayers. If it's okay to say the regular words, as Maimonides emphasizes it is, then why complicate it? Maimonides, I think, is doing a pretty neat trick here. His letter was addressed to Obadiah, to an individual, but really he was writing to a much larger audience. To the Jews by chance, he wrote repeatedly, we say the same prayers, we are the same. That was the message they would have received when they read the letter that Maimonides wrote. But to the Jew by choice, to Obadiah, he received a different message. No, Obadiah, you're not the same. Your experience in the synagogue is nothing like that of others. When you read these lines, you experience them in a way that others do not. Your Judaism is predicated on the idea that you chose this identity. To insist you are identical is to erase your identity. You have every right to say the same words as everyone else, but you can choose to say what feels right to you And Ovadia, you get to make that choice and no one else. We see Maimonides' approach carried out even today with our conventions when it comes to Hebrew names. A Hebrew name, as many of you know, it has three parts. It has your name, then it has ben or bat, son or daughter of, and then your parents' names, and your parents' Hebrew names. And it is tradition for Jews by choice to adopt the parental names of Abraham and Sarah. Abraham, our father, Sarah, our mother. This is in keeping with honoring Jews by choice and affirming they are direct descendants of the founders of our faith. However, it also has the effect of publicly identifying Jews by choice whenever their name is announced. Not everyone realizes this, but that tradition that I described of sending letters to a rabbi to find the answer to your question, that did not end with Maimonides. Even today, anyone in this room, you can submit a letter, a question, to the Responsa Committee of the Reform Movement's Rabbinic Union, and they will attempt to answer it. You can also go online and find their archives of questions they have answered over the decades. And if you look online, you'll see a question regarding a person in the process of converting who did not want to take the name of Abraham and Sarah, precisely because she feared it would identify and ostracize her from the congregation. The response of the committee is telling. They advised that the woman take the traditional name despite her hesitation. It's worth reading their answer in full, but the last line summarizes the position. We do not believe that conversion is something to hide or a source of embarrassment. We believe rather, as tradition teaches us, that the name Ben or Bat Avraham Basara is a badge of honor and respect bestowed with love and admiration that ought to be worn with satisfaction and pride. It is a nice sentiment to claim we are all the same, but it's a misguided one. By insisting you're just like us, what we're saying is you don't have to be embarrassed for who you are or where you come from. And what that's really saying is who you are or where you come from is embarrassing. Our tradition offers a different approach. A Jew by choice should be treated with the same respect and honor as everyone else, but that doesn't mean pretending to be like everyone else. One's identity is not meant to be a secret to be hidden away shamefully. If people do feel embarrassed, it's likely because they have been shamed by the community. Ultimately, it is up to the individual to decide in their prayers and in their lives when and how to share their story. One final thought on the topic of embarrassment. Maimonides had some choice words for Jews by chance, those people who might be tempted to look down upon others and feel that their Jewish blood somehow supersedes another's Jewish heart. Yes, Maimonides says, it's true. You might be able to trace your Jewish lineage back through generations, but maybe you shouldn't exactly be so proud of that. After all, at some point you're going to confront your ancestors who worshipped idols when they were in Egypt, or the ones who built the golden calf when they were in the desert. Perhaps it's your ancestry that's problematic. That's Maimonides, not me. As we approach the High Holy Days, may we be reminded of the diversity of our congregation. Not just Jews by choice, Jews by chance, but so many other categories. Those with a Jewish ancestor who is trying to figure out if that makes them Jewish. Those non-Jews who are more involved than their Jewish spouses. Those in the process of exploring Judaism, and those who simply admire Judaism. Regardless of how you see yourself, I speak on behalf of all of us at Temple when I say we are so glad you are here to worship with us together tonight and all nights. Shabbat Shalom.